a lot of what I want to share today is really to say that the creativity that you have within you is totally within a veil to be optimized. I want to start with this image, which I saw back in, it was around March or April of 2020, and it was in the Harvard Business Review, and it was an article about grief. And the article was called, "That Discomfort You're Feeling is Called Grief." And there were two takeaways that I got from reading this interview with David Kessler, who's considered one of the world's foremost thought leaders on the topic of grief. The first takeaway was that the 5 stages of grief that we typically think of, which are denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and then finally acceptance, are totally nonlinear. And that was very reassuring to me because I don't know about you, but I've been feeling like an emotional ping pong ball in this past year. So the reality that a grief expert was saying that these ways that we think about grieving are totally nonlinear was very reassuring. But there was also another takeaway that was very interesting to me as a creativity strategist. And the other takeaway is that David Kessler said we should actually end on a 6th stage of grief. Instead of ending on acceptance, which is kind of ending on a plateau, we should really end on meaning, meaning. And the reason why I love this advice to end on meaning is that creativity is all about the business of meaning making. What's our purpose? What's the point of all this? How can we better navigate our way through this unprecedented amount of ambiguity? So then some months later, this particular cover of the New Yorker magazine went viral. This is an illustration by the comic book illustrator Adrian Tomine. And it was from the December 7th, 2020 cover of the New Yorker. And this particular illustration is called Love Life. And I love this because the more I look at it, the more details that I see, right? So, for example, this is a young lady who's on a virtual date. She's got a cocktail in one hand and her phone in the other. If you look really closely, you'll see that she hasn't shaved her legs. She's got some hair stubble on her legs. Her kitchen sink is a hot mess. She's got wine bottles, some empty and some still full, on the top of her fridge. Her makeshift screen propped up behind her. Behind that is her unmade bed. The reason why this really spoke to me in this moment is that this is an illustration of the blurred boundaries that we are all needing to navigate. Blurred boundaries between work and home and learning and play, work and play. And the reality is our need and skill set to navigate these blurred boundaries is not going anywhere. In this next normal, we will need to figure out a very different true north to see our way through this unprecedented amount of ambiguity. A lot of top-notch leaders have been talking about how significant empathy is in order to navigate our way forward. So, for example, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, has talked about how critical empathy is. This particular quote, that empathy is the skill of the future, comes from Google's chief innovation evangelist, Frederick Furt. And I completely agree with them. I see in so many examples on a daily basis how we need to empathize. Even John and Chris in their case stories and their case studies that they were showing earlier were talking about at different moments the need to exercise empathy, even in the interpretation of cases. But as much as we've been talking about empathy, that has really given me pause to really wonder, well, how do you begin to empathize? What's the step before empathy? I think we might be missing a step. And so the more I thought about it, here's what I landed on. That curiosity is actually the precursor to empathy. That before you can empathize with anyone, you have to be curious. You have to be able to frame new, different, and better questions about why do they do it that way and not our way? Why do they sit over there and not over here? And until we exercise that ability to ask new and different questions, which I gather is a lot of what you do in your work in risk assessment and risk management, that we really won't be able to move the needle in being empathic leaders. In my view, curiosity is truly the currency of the future, and it's quickly becoming a lost skill and a lost art. So as the more I thought about, well, how do we become more empathic? How do we really lead with empathy as leaders at like Microsoft and Google are telling us we need to do? Where does that all start? I'm a bit of a nerd, so you'll have to indulge me. I like to play around a lot with frameworks and visualize them. And so this is one idea that I've been noodling on. And I think about creativity as a competency. I have this term I thought up called CQ. Just like we have IQ and we have EQ, we also have a certain capacity for creativity, what I call our creativity quotient. But where does it begin? In my view, it actually begins with the mindset of gratitude. And it begins with a mindset of gratitude because when we are grateful, we cease to see ourselves magnified beyond everyone else. When we begin to exercise a mindset of gratitude, we actually become systems designers. We see ourselves in context, in networked, in relationship to other people. And that gratitude mindset then begets humility because we begin to understand we're actually kind of a small determinant and factor in the midst of all the other factors that make things happen. Humility leads to curiosity because when we are more humble, we're not afraid to admit, I don't know the answer. I don't have an answer. I wonder, what's your opinion? What would you do? What do you think, right? Humility then begets the ability to ask new questions, to cede control, and to be a lot more transparent. I think I've already established that curiosity is the precursor to empathy. And once we are truly empathic, that hopefully leads to action and to equitable action. So thinking about building creativity starting with mindset is really crucial here. Ray Dalio is the co-founder of Bridgewater. He's the co-founder of Bridgewater. And he has a pretty unorthodox way of thinking about leadership, if you know anything about Bridgewater. And he is very amenable to every room in their headquarters being audio recorded. So there's no secrets. Whatever you're talking about, it's on tape. They can play back the tape a week later, the next day, 3 months from now. And that ends up weeding out people who say, that's not for me, that's not the kind of work environment I want to be in. On the other hand, he ends up keeping people who are really open to this type of radical transparency. And one of the things that happens is that it really begins to foster really great questions. And so Ray Dalio has said that great questions are a much better indicator of future success than great answers. We can tell a lot more about a person by the quality of the questions that they ask often than by their simple answers, which they may in fact just be regurgitating. So as a creativity strategist, I collect a lot of signals on the landscape. I practice a lot of foresight. And when I read through the Risk and Insurance Journal, I was so excited to see that in the practice of risk assessment in enterprise risk management, there's a lot of similarities, there's a lot of parallels, there's a lot of future scenario planning that has to be done. If this, then that. So there's a lot of creativity that is required in that. Now, I always remind people that foresight has really nothing to do with telling the future. Foresight is all about identifying multiple possible future states and being deeply rooted in the present. So I want to share with you some signals on the landscape that I've been observing that point more and more to how important it's going to be to develop our creativity, competency, and our CQ. The human quotient. So here's one signal. About 2 Mother's Days ago, about 2.5 years ago, my husband gifted me a subscription to Masterclass for Mother's Day. And I was really excited, I loved it, and I'm a former professor. I was actually a professor for 16 years. And one of the things I love about Masterclass is that it's totally turned on the head of higher education, what it means to learn. It's great production value. The subject matter experts do not need a PhD. They have shown their value through street cred. They've been in the trenches to become experts. And it's learning on your terms, when you want to learn, when you're able to tune in. So this was really interesting to me because I thought, this is kind of an interesting signal about how people want to learn. And we were already seeing, COVID just accelerated the disruptions that are starting to happen to higher ed, especially when we think about the costs that are involved. The second signal that I saw came about this past late spring, around June of 2021. And in my inbox, I get an invitation from Fast Company magazine to join a course, which is about future-proofing your career. And that was funny to me because now everyone's getting in the learning business, LinkedIn, Fast Company. And what was even more interesting about this course is that the modules included topics such as creativity, innovation, showing your best self, all the sorts of things that, again, have nothing to do with hard, rational data, and this is the language we typically use, but something that we often think of in terms of as soft skills. In my view, I've been predicting for quite some time that we're going to see a return to the apprenticeship model. Not the apprenticeships that we saw in the medieval days, but apprenticeships that really will see interesting collaborations and strategic partnerships between higher education and private sector, because people want to learn by doing and people want to learn experientially. Here's a few more examples, and these examples of signals on the landscape pointing out the human quotient come from popular culture. I happen to love TV. You have to admit, it's never been better. And here's a few examples of what I'm talking about. The young man in the upper left image is a character named Junior from the hit sitcom on ABC, Blackish. And in this particular scene, he's exasperatedly explaining to his parents that, yes, I got into university, but I don't want to go right away. I want to take a gap year. And to his properly educated African-American bourgeoisie parents who've been working there his entire life to make sure that when he graduates from high school, he will be going on to college, they're mortified. And he's like, no, I want to work a little bit. I want to learn by doing. I don't want to go straight to college. The next scene, next image, is from a different TV show that I also really enjoyed, a TV show called Big Little Lies. And this is a character named Abigail. Notice the similar body language between Abigail and Junior as teenagers. Now, Abigail, in this particular scene, she's saying to her mom, look, Mommy, I don't even want to take the standardized tests. I don't want to apply to college. In fact, I've already gotten a job with a startup. Now, her mom, Madeline, is played by Reese Witherspoon. Her character, Madeline, didn't even go to college, and so she is horrified. Now, why does this matter? These are indicators, signals on the landscape of Gen Zs, centennials, who have very different mores and values about purpose, about meaning, and about the ways that they want to learn. And these are the folks who we will be recruiting for our organizations and who with whom we will be working side by side. The final example is another show I really love called Billions. And this is the character Wendy Rhodes, who works for a VC firm, venture capital firm called Axe Capital. Now, Wendy is a psychologist, and she sits in the C-suite along with the founder, the CTO, the GC. And what does she do every day as she's guiding the other employees who wake up daily to make another margin of hundreds of millions of dollars? She's helping them to be attuned to their inner child, to be able to visualize the future, to meditate. And I just thought this was so fascinating. Here we have a really traditional sector, financial services, and we have this character with a solidly liberal arts background who's helping people really tune into their humanity, their humanness. All of these signals on the landscape I'm pointing out because they signal and flag that soft skills are totally hardcore. Soft skills such as curiosity, empathy, improvising, anticipating what's next, negotiating, collaborating. These are skills that robots aren't particularly good at, and it's actually the opportunity in this fourth industrial revolution where tech is ubiquitous. These are the spaces and the competencies that will actually give us an edge. And the organizations and companies that really hone in on soft skills will be the ones that flourish. I actually recently had an article published by Fast Company about one of these soft skills, about collaboration specifically, and how even in a virtual work environment, we have opportunities to collaborate in all sorts of ways. And I'm actually going to be talking about some of the skill sets towards the end of this presentation around curiosity and improvisation, and also being kind, which cannot be underestimated. The reason why this is increasingly important is because we're needing to survive in a VUCA environment, environments that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Another small shout out to Philly. This particular term was created at the Army College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, just a short ways down from Philadelphia. This is a term that actually comes from our US military when we first entered Afghanistan. And for obvious reasons, the terrain was volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And then slowly but surely, corporate America began to also incorporate this term. But with this type of terrain that we're needing to navigate in our personal lives with those blurred boundaries for our children and with our colleagues, here's a question I want us to be exploring. How might we design more opportunities for inspired leadership, leading with curiosity, improvisation, and intuition? Well, I have some thoughts about that. In a world where we now know that we can work from anywhere and that we can learn from anywhere, those leaders and those organizations that work at the intersection of these three things will be the ones that flourish. Those who can work at the intersection of productivity, digital technology, and meaningful human experience. Now, in my work as a creativity strategist and advisor, I see all the time that my clients usually have 2 out of these 3 down. They typically are really good at the productivity part. They might be working on integrating the tech, or they're really good at the tech and they're trying to figure out how to also integrate the productivity. The part that's lacking, the part that's a little more challenging, is how do we integrate meaningful human experience internally with our teams and also externally in terms of how we're serving our clients. And I'm biased, but in my view, creativity is the through line of how we can integrate productivity, tech, and meaningful human experience. So let me run down for you, if you happen to be more of a numbers person, more of a quant person, some of the reasons that even endorse even further why a creativity quotient, a creativity competency is essential as the engine for innovation. The World Economic Forum since 2016 has been saying that creativity is the number 3 job skill for 2020 and beyond. And what's interesting is that job skills numbers 1 and 2 were critical thinking and problem solving. And PS, critical thinking and problem solving are part of creativity. So net, creativity keeps bumping up there within the top 3 job skills for 2020 and beyond. Steelcase, you may be aware of, is a furniture design company. And Steelcase has done some incredible research around upskilling, reskilling, future of work. So the next several statistics actually come from Steelcase. Their research showed that 55% of people they surveyed want to be more creative in their work, but 19% are pointing to a lack of guidance or permission to be creative. And then 60%, they looked at their data generationally as well, 60% of Gen Y, millennials, and Gen Z, centennials, are actually showing a lot more creative ambition than Gen X and boomers. And this matters because this is one of the first times when 4 different generations will be working side by side. We have to pay attention to this. Fidelity Investments has also done some interesting work and research, and they learned that 58% of millennials, again looking generationally, are ranking the quality of their work environment over financial remuneration when they're exploring a job offer. And the final statistic that I find super interesting comes from Degreed. Again, looking generationally, they learned that 46% of people report that they are more likely to leave their employer if there is not opportunity and a commitment to upskilling and reskilling. And the net effect is going to be on reduced productivity. All roads point to how essential it is to up the ante in creativity.